I think this is a crisis that we haven't faced since 9/11. I think it's worse than 9/11 because we ran towards the danger and tried to save people, then now we're abandoning them. What do you think is the president going to stick with this?
It seems like the president is doubling down on the August 31st deadline. And what is shocking to me, we had a brief with Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, General Milley, et cetera, yesterday. And there was very strong bipartisan pushback on the August 31st deadline. In fact, some of the strongest statements pushing back on that came from my Democratic colleagues, particularly those who are veterans who've served in Afghanistan and in uniform in other parts of the world, were very forceful in telling the administration to their face that this is a disaster. And I think there was a recognition by the administration that we can't get all of our people, let alone the thousands of SIV applicants out, or just, women seeking asylum who risk being killed or brutally tortured at the hands of the Taliban, that we can't get them out by August 31st. And yet a few hours later, the president of the United States went on TV and doubled down on the August 31st deadline, which is completely arbitrary, let me rather say, is solely intended to get us out before September 11th. 2021. And as we've discussed before, Hugh, whoever in the White House decided it would be a good idea to try and get everyone out by September 11th, 2021, and thinking that that would be some positive PR win for the United States, should be fired, because that's a huge, huge propaganda win for the Taliban. And now it's also put us in the practical position on the ground of being entirely dependent on the largesse of the Taliban to get our people out. And I guarantee you, we're going to leave thousands of people behind, and that's unacceptable for the United States of America.
Congressman Gallagher, I'd like to point to two lies. The first lie is that we were obliged to leave by May 1. The Taliban broke the agreement at least as early as March when they attacked forward operating base Chapman and wounded 7 Americans. So they violated the agreement. We're already beyond the May 1 deadline. There is no agreement, and there is no need to go. Secondly, there's a terrorist threat. Every American who's been in Afghanistan, including you, has been under a terrorist threat whenever they have been there. We've got 6,000 of our finest Marines and the 101st Airborne. I know I don't want any of them hurt either. But what do you make of those two arguments that we've already extended the deadline and we're under a terrorist threat?
Well, of course, the Doha agreement was conditions-based, and one of the conditions was that the Taliban not allow al-Qaeda to operate from their territory, and of course they did. I believe even the UN pointed that out at one point. And if you don't think that's true, then there's evidence in the form of the fact that we've killed al-Qaeda operatives on Afghanistan soil in that timeline. So clearly they violated the agreement. More to the point, there's just nothing that bound Biden to keeping the Doha agreement. There's nothing that said we couldn't have altered it in a variety of ways. And I think this idea that you're starting to see bubble up in the Beltway media, I would sort of commend David Ignatius's latest article, because I think he really gets the thinking among Biden's defenders that now the Taliban could somehow be a security partner against ISIS Khorasan or other terrorist groups in the country. That's what they're betting on right now. And I think that is a terrible bet that's at odds with the way the Taliban operates. So there was nothing that was boxing President Biden into a particular timeline. The Taliban was absolutely in violation of the agreement. And the fact that the president hasn't shown one iota of humility throughout this crisis, to me, suggests he's not learning anything. I wrote an entire dissertation on the conditions under which presidents will make changes in response to bad things happening. And I think Biden has demolished my argument, because part of it was that presidents with foreign policy experience are more willing to make changes and more nimble in the making of the change. And Biden certainly has a lot of foreign policy experience, but it turns out it's all the wrong kind of foreign policy experience. In fact, I think he has a perfect record. It's a record of being wrong on everything in modern foreign policy history.
Well, Congressman Gallagher, I want to establish one thing, and I'll come back and play this tape when terrible things happen. There is a direct line, and we can see it. It's known as duty, breach, causation, damages. It's the tort. We know what's going to come out of Afghanistan. Zawahiri is going to show up. They've got munitions dumps. They've got fighters. They are going to go there, going to dispatch terrorists around the world. They're going to fund terrorists around the world. That will all be on Joe Biden. Not only that, we're going to see hostage after hostage after hostage. Is there any doubt in your mind that that's what we're going to see?
No, the hostage crisis in particular, the looming hostage crisis is really what worries me. I mean, the State Department couldn't even give us a number. When pressed by Democrats, I would tell you, pressed by Democrats on how many Americans are in country, could not even give us a number. So we're cutting and running without even knowing how many people we're leaving behind. But make no mistake, we are leaving people behind. And just think of all of the terrible situations that's going to put us in going forward. I don't know if we're going to see ISIS-style beheadings, but we could see massive extortion at a minimum. Just absolutely.
Well, did they give you a minimum number? I understand. Admiral Kirby has said many times, Ned Price has said, Americans don't have to register. We're not sure. It's the same talking point. And the only question, what's the minimum number about which we are certain that are there and have not been able to get out? Is it 100? Is it 500? Is it 5,000? Do they have any minimum number?
No number at all, at least from what I saw. They resisted providing a specific number, which is incredible. Now, their argument is, okay, when people come into Afghanistan, they're encouraged to register with the embassy. Some do, some don't, and then some don't deregister when they leave the country. I understand, but we should at least have some range of an estimate about how many
have contacted you, right?
Exactly.
Like how many have contacted you? Because you've got a list. Now, my question is, have people forgotten Danny Pearl? Have they forgotten the woman journalist in Syria? Have they forgotten the Beirut CIA station chief? These are fanatics. It's not like we're giving, they're pirates. They're the absolute worst people in the world, and we're abandoning Americans to it. It's mind-boggling.
And by the way, the Taliban has American hostages right now. To me, I don't understand why, if we're going to make this humiliating surrender agreement, why it didn't even include getting some of the hostages back that we know they have. The other thing I'd say, Hugh, is, if the White House continues to make this argument that, well, don't worry about the collapse of our position in Afghanistan, leaving behind American citizens, the fact that we don't have the ability to do over the horizon counterterrorism there. It's all about China and the Pacific. Our past actions and our reputation in a different theater doesn't matter in terms of our ability to deter China. Okay, well, if you accept that argument, then everything hinges on the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific vis-a-vis China. And that balance of power is getting worse in large part because the Biden Defense Department is making it worse, and its budget is abysmal. And yesterday we voted on a $5 trillion bill that takes us to the lowest level of defense spending as a function of GDP in 80 years. So it's their priorities, which are all out of whack, which hinge entirely on passing a Bernie Sanders progressive budget while decimating defense, that is weakening our position vis-a-vis China. Now, by the way, I don't accept that agreement. I think our actions in Afghanistan resonate throughout the world, and I think it's a huge gift geopolitically to China that they're going to exploit. But even on their own terms, their argument fails because they are weakening the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific.
Congressman Gallagher, I've got in my hand the editorial by Nick Allen, who's the U.S. editor of The Telegraph. The headline is Joe Biden's Betrayal. Allies can never trust this president again. Pointless G7 meeting framed one of America's most embarrassing retreats as a great success. I won't read it again, but it describes that the allies were set up. They were told that there was going to be a conversation about staying. All of them want to stay, push back the deadline, get their people out. Biden rolled them and then came out and said they all agreed with him. And this argued they will never believe Biden again. period. He's making Trump look like the most credible president ever.
The president is lying to our faces. And I really do think, Hugh, the cynical calculation he and his advisors are making right now is that this is just a news story that will blow over. This is a cycle you can manage and message, and that a week from now, or at worst a month from now, the American people will move on to some other shiny object and they won't care about what's happening in Afghanistan. Think how cynical of a view that is. I mean, they basically think we're stupid. They think we are stupid, and therefore they can get away with lying to us. He lied about the Al-Qaeda presence in Afghanistan. He's lying about the fact that our allies were consulted. He lied about the difficulties that Americans were having getting to the airport in Kabul. This has been a string of consistent lies. Facing his first foreign policy crisis, President Biden has failed. He has failed the commander-in-chief test.
Benghazi was a dress rehearsal on a small stage for what is happening right now. Benghazi was the abandonment of a dozen Americans to terrorists. This is the abandonment of hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans to terrorists. And they're just going to deny, lie. And until we get the Congress back, we're not going to be able to do anything about it.
That was my wake-up moment, Hugh. I was in the National Counterterrorism Center, Ops Center, the night Benghazi happened. We got some of the first reports. I wrote one of the first summaries of it. And then the next day when I turned on the TV when I was home, I saw the way in which they totally spun it for political purposes. As a young Marine officer, idealistic about the world, generally assuming our officials try and tell the truth and do the right thing, that was a huge, huge wake-up call for me. And one of the reasons I ran for Congress, by the way, to fix our failing foreign policy. But I think all of the progress that we've made in a bipartisan fashion, I would say, on China and other issues in the last 5 years have now been flushed down the drain. In the same way Obama flushed all of the progress of the surge in Iraq down the drain when he precipitously withdrew for purely political purposes, a decade ago.
The only good thing that can come out of this, Congressman, is if veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan step up and run, especially those who have interpreters who've been betrayed. If they come and tell the story that they got in because their interpreter was betrayed, I'm looking for them to fill the new districts. Congressman, thank you. Always a pleasure. Talk to you next week. Keep giving those speeches on the floor of the House.